You know, there have been times in history when people have got away with, well, some pretty massive crimes. You think, though, that somebody who didn't need a whole lot of money, like who had more than they could spend for the rest of their lives on their own, would want some more? Yeah, they would. Yeah. I got a couple of stories for you today. These are stories about people who just couldn't quit. In the 1960s, there were dancers in bars, girls, who were called go-go dancers. And these were typified by girls who wore mini dresses and sometimes boots. But not necessarily. Sometimes they were in cages. They were usually on a raised platform. Well, it was kind of a sexist thing to do, and it kind of died out by about 1970 something. But it was there. And it actually bred a term, go-go, G-O-G-O. It was kind of a reference to the way the world was moving at the time, faster than normal, which was true. Everything was on the go constantly, including the dancers and the stock market. Yes, the stock market of North America in the 1960s was called the Go-Go 60s market. We coined the phrase at the time. Yeah, it was great. Along comes a guy, and he was, I forget his name right now, but we saw this back in the, I think it was about the 70s. It was a film about a company, and this company was called National Student Marketing, NSM. National Student Marketing was a company that sold insurance and primarily focused on university students. So, would that sound like something that was harmless? It does, actually. I mean, you think about it, everybody wants some form of insurance, and when you're young, you can buy it usually for a little cheaper. So, what could they possibly do wrong? Well, they recruited a few university students at first, and they did really well. These guys were go-getters. And so they came out with a share price of, $6. Dirt cheap at the time. Sounded all right. So the CEO did really well. Everybody did really well for a couple of years. And at the end of those 2 years, the growth in the number of student policies began to taper and level off. Yeah, he was never going to get that stock to fly too high, even in the middle of the go-go 60s if he didn't have growth, because that was the key word that everybody heard constantly. Growth! Everything was getting bigger. And so he went to his IT guy. Now, back then, an IT guy was really an IT guy. He had to deal with a mainframe, and back then, the meaning of data was different because it was held in so few hands. It was so hard to fake. So he said to his IT guy, he said, look, the next meeting is coming up, the thing for growth. We've got to have some. So I know I'm not asking you to do this. You don't have to do this. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to create a few fake policies. Fake policies? Create them? How did you do that? Well, you see, this is again IT in the 1960s. Insurance companies have always done something which is called co-insurance, where they swap policies back and forth between themselves, and they do this to reduce their risk, or because they need cash for something else, or, whatever. It didn't really matter. So, out of every 100 policies that were printed out, and there's a number that was printed out on a piece of paper by a teletype machine back then, okay? This is how it's done. That represented the sale of an insurance policy, and that was the number one guarantee that the policy existed. Yeah. There was certainly the piece of paper that people had in their hands, but who was going to go out from house to house counting pieces of paper that people had in their hands? Nobody. They had to believe the insurance company, right? So the IT guy said, well, okay, as long as we're going to buy them back, I'm fine with that. And so he began to put in one in every 100 policies, and he numbered them with the number 99 at the beginning of the policy number, so that he'd be able to tell which ones to buy back from the other insurance companies when the time came. And he'd know which ones were fake, and how many there were. It'd be easy to sort, right? Well, that was great, and the company did well for its third year in a row. And then it had to do it again. And it got worse, and the pressure got worse to come up with the growth, to keep the investors happy. And of course, the CEO turned the screws on the IT guy. And the IT guy liked his job, so he said okay. And he added more policies that were fake to the printout. By the end of about the 1970, About 9 out of every 10 policies being supposedly sold by National Student Marketing were fake. They didn't really exist. And the stock price was $140 a share. Yeah. Here was a guy. He really didn't need to do this. I mean, running an insurance company can be a very profitable thing. Even if you're only going to charge $6 a share for your shares, you're going to get paid premiums every single month. And it's more than enough to live on when there's 100,000 and a million. One of the things that finally tipped everybody off was how many students are going to university in the United States of America and how many policies are there. And when you compared the two, it was quite impossible for the number of policyholders to exist. And thus began the death of National Student Marketing, which was just a fake shell. And a lot of people lost a lot of money at $140 a share because they were playing something called the greater fool theory. If I'm fool enough to have bought it at 100 and you are fool enough to buy it at 140, hooray for me! You're a bigger idiot than I am. That's the system that they were playing with. No, you'd think this would never happen again, right? That nobody would ever pull another financial stunt like that. Well, in the year 2008, there was a guy, and he was in New York. And he'd been running an investment company since the 1960s. Yeah, early 60s, actually. His name is Bernie Madoff. You've heard the story of Bernie Madoff, or maybe you haven't and need to. So let me tell it to you again. Bernie Madoff and his family were all employed by him, were high-flying billionaires by the time they were done. And what happened? Well, he invested money for people who were really rich. So people would come to him, and there's some very famous names, which I won't repeat because I don't want to get sued. And they'd give him $1 million. And they'd say, here you go, Bernie, I've heard great things about you. And he'd turn around, and a year later, he'd give them $1.2 million back. And he did this over and over and over again. And how did he do it? He never invested a dime. No, honest to God, never put a dime into anything. He wasn't a very good investor necessarily. What he did was called asset management. That was the arm of the company that took the millions and millions and then handed it back out without ever having made any money. Well, at the end of the thing, what happens is that there's always a number of people who are left holding the bag because their money has been given back to somebody else with their supposed investment increase. But, you got to ask yourself, now why would a guy like Bernie do that? I mean, really. He was a billionaire, right? He did it because he is human and he's greedy. And for every time someone handed him $1 million, he was taking a fee. Oh yeah, Bernie was no slouch. Let's not forget that. So he was skimming. Yeah. By the year 2008, Bernie decided he would confess to his two sons that the asset management side of the company had been a Ponzi scheme, like I've just described to you, where you get your $1 million in, get your $1.2 million out, and some other sucker is funding it because he's handing over his $1 million, and you hope you're not going to get caught. Well, when that happened, for some reason, only a few weeks later, they nailed him. I don't think his kids were involved in thinking on him particularly. So, Bernie Madoff went to jail. His sentence was 150 years. He's never getting out. No, we value our money more than we value human life. And that can tell you, because if you go to jail for murder, you're liable to get 25 years and you may be out in 8. Take somebody's money away and it's a new story. But of course, it's not just the money, it's how much. You see, Bernie was convicted of having stolen $64.3 billion off of 4,800 people at the end of the scam. Now, there was a whole lot more than 4,800 people who went through things in the first place and got scammed, almost, but got their money back out. That's $13,333,000 per person who got scammed. Now, there's two classes of very rich people. There are people who have more than enough, who can play with the money and, kind of like, I'll put in my $1 million and get my 1.2. And that's the end of the line for them. And then there's the people who have billions and billions and billions of dollars, like Bernie Madoff, who, 13 million bucks, it's chump change. Throw it at it, and they made that in interest yesterday anyway. If I lose it, what the hell? That's where things have gone wrong. The inequality of this vast wealth versus the vast majority of people who have nothing left at the end of the month and are $400 away from bankruptcy or insolvency. You can call it whatever you prefer. It doesn't really matter. That's too much. Now, once they nailed Bernie Madoff and they gave him his 150-year sentence, and he confessed, they took away $19 billion from him. Now, $19 billion? Wouldn't you have quit, let's say, the first 100 million and said, I'm getting out of this lousy scheme. I don't need to do this anymore. I mean, I got more money than I'll ever know what to do with. No, because that's not the way we're made. We're made to want more, even if it's meaningless more. It makes you wonder about people who have billions and just how far they will go to get more that they don't need and don't want. But just, gotta have it. They want to build a pile. A pointless pile. So, now that I've told you this, think about your friends. How many of them have $13,333,000 that you know of that want to throw it away? I'm waiting. No, don't have many. You might have known one person in your life, or even met them, who fit that mold. I've met a few, actually, I tell you. And the one guy I met, he was a billionaire. No, two. I've met Bill Gates, too. Just at a passing at Comdex, a computer dealer exhibit. He doesn't know me, but I knew his face, because everybody knew who the hell Bill Gates was. Anyway, so, I've shaken hands with the guy. These people, they don't need any extra dough. And they're the ultra-rich. And they're our social problem today. We have created them by voting conservative. And our Conservative Party wants to do some more for them. I think it's time we went back to that Conservative Party and said, enough, boys. You start raising the taxes on the ultra-rich and bringing the cash back into the flow of society, because we're tired of buying shit from China at Walmart. We want to be able to do better. We'd like to have enough cash to be able to maybe start our own business or do our own thing, or maybe give something to somebody else who really does need it. We want to stop feeling hopeless and crushed. We don't want you to make us feel more crushed by taking away more social services so you can give more stuff to the ultra-wealthy. So, my point? Stop voting conservative, because all they're going to do is screw you under, and they're going to lie to you as they do it, just like Bernie did and just like National Student Marketing did. Neither of them needed to. I'm Patrick Stewart. I never vote conservative, and you shouldn't either.